Hi, you're watching The Times of India. I'm Aditi Prasad. I'm joined by economist Steve Hanke, professor of applied economics at the Johns Hopkins University. But that does not really sum up your persona, sir. So I wanted to talk some more about you. We were an advisor under Ronald Reagan in the early 1980s, and he's also consulted for numerous foreign governments ever since. Now, thank you for joining us today, sir. We have a host of questions for you, but let me start with what's top of mind for most in the world right now, which is the Putin-Trump summit in Alaska. Now, your sense on what is most likely outcome and who is going into this meeting with a better hand? Is it Trump or is it Putin?
Well, thank you for having me on with you. I think that your last question is Putin has all the cards. Number one, you have to set the table a little bit. Who's going to this meeting? And you've got Putin on one side, a very sophisticated diplomat, very knowledgeable with a tremendous experience. And his foreign minister happens to be Sergei Lavrov, who's probably the world's #1 diplomat, foreign minister.
Yeah.
So that's on the Russian side, the personality, shall we say, and highly professional. Most people don't understand. The Russians at the top level are very sophisticated. So that's one thing. Now the U.S. side, well, you've got President Trump, who has a very thin knowledge of any of these foreign countries or aspects. He's not an in-depth person. He's a reality TV kind of personality. And his staff are basically, shall we say, lightweights compared to the Russians. They're not really professionals. They don't have a lot of experience or any depth in these matters. So those are the personalities that will be showing up on both sides. And the reality on the ground is there's a war going on in Ukraine, and Russia has won the war, and they're moving ahead very rapidly. So that's why I say Putin has all the cards. He knows what he's doing. Trump really has no cards, and as a result, I think what we're going to see, this will be a great photo opportunity for Trump. And for Putin, by the way, but that's all that's going to happen.
But something that you said, and I just wanted to just weigh in some more on this. You said Putin has won the war.
There's no question about it.
Why do you say that?
It's over. Anyone who knows anything about military operations knows that Russia's cleaning house. They're on the verge of completely wiping out the Ukrainian army. It's over. It's been over for quite a while, by the way, but it's really reaching the ultimate point where the Ukrainian army is just completely annihilated. The Russian meat grinder is grinding on. Let's put it that way.
Oh my God! But we know that Russia already holds or has taken over 18% of Ukrainian territory. When you say the war is over, do you think Putin's war goals have been achieved, or is there more? He basically wanted to create that buffer zone between Ukraine and Russia, which this 18% land, does it give him that?
Well, Russia has other goals that are non-negotiable, and we've known about these for a long time. And that's another reason that nothing is going to happen in Alaska later today between Russia and Putin, simply because there are non-negotiable elements in the Russian playbook. And one of those, of course, as you say, the buffer zone, they'll solidify Crimea and the 4 Donbass. That's one thing. But the other big thing is that Ukraine will become neutral. It'll be like Austria became after the Second World War. That's neutrality. They want Ukraine to be neutral. So that's a huge strategic thing, and there'll be I think enormous amount of quibbling and bargaining and fighting over that. And Russia, by the way, if Ukraine is neutral, that means you're going to have no foreign troops or no NATO membership or anything like that in Ukraine after the war.
Will Europe and Ukraine, if Putin and Trump arrive at some sort of an agreement as to the nature of neutral Ukraine that you're talking about, will Europe and Ukraine, mainly Zelensky and the EU nations, agree to that?
Well, I think this will ultimately be decided on the battlefield because I'm not certain whether they will agree to it. Right now, I would say no, they're not going to agree to it. I think in the end they're going to be forced to agree to it. But right now, either that. Let us assume that there's some kind of a peace agreement or shall we say ceasefire, but not a permanent peace. A permanent peace would require all the non-negotiable demands of Russia be met, and that's usually the spoils of victory go to the victor. They don't go to the loser. The loser has no cards to play. So these
why is Trump?
These non-negotiable.
Do you think Trump can say yes?
What?
Do you think Trump can say yes to these non-negotiable demands that you are talking about, the Russian demands?
No.
Does he have to?
I don't think he's going to say anything about it. I don't think he's going to say anything of substance.
According to the Telegraph, I was reading a paper, Trump is planning to present a package of economic proposals aimed at incentivizing Kremlin to agree to a ceasefire. Now, these include granting Kremlin access to rare earth minerals in Ukrainian territories, which are currently under Russian occupation. How do you give someone which they already are controlling? I'm just sort of confused. What are the cards that Donald Trump has with him?
Well, you put your finger on the thing. It's kind of a joke. I mean, Russia has control of the rare earths, by the way, which are very problematic. These are a little bit of a phantom. The rare earths, all the minerals, all these riches and so forth in Ukraine. If they had these things, why haven't they developed them? And why aren't they're not really something that's front and center. They at best they're on the back of the stove, not the front.
Okay, so my next question then, why are Trump and Putin meeting if you think nothing is going to come out of this? Clearly both these leaders think something is going to come out of this. Could you just delve into what they're thinking? I mean, what is the thought process?
Well, Trump wants a photo op where he's the center stage, but Putin really in reality, Putin has gotten what he wants. He wants to be legitimized, and he wants to be in the United States, by the way.
Yeah.
Remember, he was painted, but he's painted by everybody as a pariah. That no one, especially the Europeans, the Europeans are really warmongers. They not only have welfare states in Europe, they have warfare states in Europe. Of course, they don't have the firepower to back up much of anything. They can hardly shoot a pea shooter. It's a U.S. who's been financing all of this and the war on the Ukrainian side, and it's the U.S. who's supplying most of the munitions and weaponry. So if Trump really wanted to stop, by the way, this gets to a key point. If Trump really wanted to stop the war, he would just stop sending the money and he would stop sending the weapons. Now he's made it appear, you see, this is typical Trump smoke and mirrors. He said, well, we're cutting off the weapons going into Ukraine. He announces this on the one hand, but on the other hand, He's selling the weapons to Europeans who will pay for them, and they will send them onto the Ukraine battlefield. So that's how it works. If you want to shut down, by the way, if you want to shut down the two big wars going on right now are where? They're in Ukraine, Russians and Ukrainians, and in Gaza and Lebanon and Syria and Iran, other places where Israel is engaged in military operations. And who finances that? The U.S. pours the money in to finance Israel, and they pour the weapons in. So if Trump really was interested in stopping wars and interested in peace, the Pakistanis they said they're going to nominate Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize. And if he wanted to win that, what would he do? He'd stop the U.S. funding of these two wars. That would be it. They would stop immediately. It's all economics. When it really gets down to it, that's one reason that it's interesting being an economist. You just follow the money.
So you think he's not getting the Nobel Prize after all?
The Nobel Prize is a political operation of the highest order. Who knows? I left my crystal ball in the closet today. I can't tell you, therefore.
Okay, but does he deserve it?
So far, no. He hasn't done anything to stop any war.
He says he stopped 6 wars.
He's been financing the wars. Trump's blaming India for, he's blaming, my friend Mukesh Ambani, who, by the way, Mukesh and I were on the board of international directors chaired by Sir John Major at the Kuwait National Bank. So I know Ambani. And Ambani has various characteristics. One is he's smart. He's got a good head on his shoulder. And two, he has good instincts and fast reflexes, and he always seems to land on his feet. So whatever they're going to do with sanctioning oil and so forth coming from Russia, I'm not too worried about Ambani's big Reliance refinery figuring out a way to deal with it.
Since we've segued into tariffs and your view on Trump weaponizing tariffs, and then of course I'm going to delve into India a little bit.
Well, my view, you have to realize where I'm coming from is I'm a classical liberal economist in particular the Austrian School of Economics. So for normal people who don't know what Austrian economics is, I'm a free market economist and I'm a free trade economist. I'm a unilateral free trade economist. So forget all the reciprocal activities and so forth. I'm against all sanctions. I'm against all tariffs. I'm against all quotas. And I'm against all non-tariff barriers. I'm for pure free trade. And free trade is always beneficial. If you're selling me something from India and I agree to buy it and you agree to sell it, you benefit. Otherwise, you wouldn't sell it, and I benefit or I wouldn't buy it. And what do tariffs do? Tariffs are an intervention that comes in between you and me as private individuals who both benefit and generate what we call gains from trade. That's what economists call them, gains from trade. And a tariff is just a tax on those. It extracts part of the gains from trade and puts them in the treasury. So it's bad. By definition, it's bad. So that's where that's where I'm coming from. Now, secondary tariffs are in the sanctions category. They're even worse than the primary tariffs.
At the end of the day.
By the way, let me just interrupt 1 second.
Sure.
So why are the sanctions so bad? They're bad in principle because you know my principles. I'm for free markets, free trade, all those things. Liberty, in short, individual liberty. So in principle, they're bad, but in practice, there's a huge scholarly literature, which I'm quite familiar with, on sanctions, and they almost never work, and they never work. They usually backfire and cause a lot of damage on the country that's imposing the sanctions. Look at Europe. Who's paid the cost for all the sanctions that have gone on Russia? It's the Europeans. The German economy has almost been destroyed, by the way, due to the fact that they've cut off, well, number one, one of the Nord Stream pipelines, they blew that up. The West did, by the way. Russia didn't blow it up. The West blew it up. So that cuts it off. And then the sanctions have cut off other energy. And Germany's in a terrible pickle with regard to its economy. Now, the other aspect, so that's the backfiring part of sanctions and unintended consequences, always negative on those who are firing the weapon. Now, the recipient usually ends up gaining by the sanctions. And that's because there's a rally around the flag effect, kind of a nationalistic effect. If you're being attacked by somebody, you circle the wagons. So what happened? I think these secondary sanctions, I'm sure, I haven't looked at the polls recently in India. I'm certain Modi's more popular. I'm certain the secondary sanctions, there's a rally, the Indians rally around the flag when they're attacked. And look at the history. North Korea, we've had sanctions on North Korea forever. And who's in power in North Korea? The same old communist regime. Look at Cuba. After the revolution and Castro came in, we've dumped sanctions on Cuba over and over and over again. And the regime is still in place because of the rally around the flag. Venezuela, a country where I was Rafael Caldera's chief advisor in 1995 and 1996, I follow it very closely. We have a socialist-communist Maduro who's in power in Venezuela, and he's been in for 11 years. He's destroyed the economy. They've had 2 hyperinflations during his reign, and he's still in power because of the U.S. sanctions. So sanctions are.
So tell me, sir, since you're talking about.
By the way, one thing, just a paraphrase, because Indians will know this. One of the great U.S. ambassadors to India was a good friend of mine, the late Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan. And Moynihan, to paraphrase him, Moynihan said, secrecy is for losers, but we could paraphrase him and say sanctions are for losers. To quote a former ambassador, a great ambassador to India, Moynihan.
But sir, tell me something. How do we then, because sanctions are a way that US tries to keep its reins on the world, so to speak. But in this growing multilateral world, where multilateralism is really the word of the day, or the week, or the year, or the month, whatever you want to call it. But in that situation, how do you counter sanctions? Is de-dollarization the way forward?
Well, what's happened? Sanctions. You see, you introduce sanctions with your question, which is an interesting question. You say, well, the U.S. puts sanctions on to keep all the other countries as vassals, and keep them under control. But the fact is, they backfire. Why do you think BRICS is becoming important and India's the leading spokes country for BRICS? It's because of U.S. sanctions. If U.S. sanctions weren't in place and the dollar wasn't being weaponized with the sanctions, BRICS would be nothing more than a talking shop. It wouldn't amount to anything. It would be a lot of wind, in the air. BRICS is becoming important, and India is becoming more important because India happens to be taking the lead, is the lead in BRICS, and that is the result, that increase in the influence of BRICS in the South is because of U.S. sanctions. And this is kind of again a rally around a flag, a rally around multiple flags. They all come together in the South, or BRICS, or whatever you want to call it.
So let me just talk about the secondary sanctions on India. If, let's say, at the end of not the Alaska summit, maybe they'll be calling it too soon, but let's say if Putin and Trump keep talking and eventually they strike a trade deal for some trade or something, eases of restrictions, some trade incentives, who knows? But then again, there'll be sort of hypocrisy because you imposed 50% tariffs on India for buying Russian oil, and then you're going and trading yourself. How does this add up? Isn't that hypocrisy?
Well, yeah, yes, it is hypocrisy. But remember, I like to quote, when I'm talking about India and the secondary sanctions, Napoleon. And Napoleon said, and I'm quoting him, "Never interfere with an enemy in the process of destroying himself." So the best position for Modi and Hanke, the foreign minister, is to sit on their hands as far as the U.S. goes and wait. Don't interfere with the enemy who's in the process of destroying himself. That's one point. The other, more proactive point is something obviously Modi's even taking up now. Where's he going? He's going to China for the first time in
after 7 years.
Yeah, that's a smart move on Modi's part, and I'm certain his foreign minister advised him to do that, by the way, because you've got three top foreign ministers that are really professionals in the world. One is in Russia. I've already mentioned. He's number one. Lavrov is the top.
Yeah. But
also China has a top foreign minister, and also India has a top foreign minister. They're all in BRICS, and as a reaction to the secondary sanctions, the tariffs, and all these things, I think that it would be wise for Russia, China, and India to lead the BRICS in the South in a huge free trade zone. A huge free trade zone, and that's how you counteract these things. You know, forget about Trump's tariff wars and sanction wars and everything. Let him destroy himself with these and destroy the U.S. economy. Because, by the way, the U.S. economy, and I'm one of the early ones predicting, I think it's on the verge of going into a recession. That's a lot different, by the way, than India. If you look at what's going on in India, the IMF projections for the next 7 years is that India is going to grow the most rapid gross national product rate of growth of any country in the world, 6.8%. Huge growth in India. And the Reserve Bank, which I watch very carefully, is doing a good job. It's controlling the money supply. The money supply is growing at 8.3% in India. Hanke's golden growth rate for India, a rate of growth in the money supply consistent with hitting its inflation target of 4%, is 10.2%. So the Reserve Bank, the growth rate in the money supply, they're keeping it under control, a little under the rate, Hanke's golden growth rate, that would be consistent with 4% inflation. And that's why India's inflation is 2.1. It's actually lower than the inflation target, because they're keeping it very tight. So you would, a lot of people would argue last week or earlier this week, I guess, I think it was August 6th, they kept the repo rate constant at 5.5%, the Reserve Bank. I think that was a smart move. And why do I think it is? A lot of people said, oh, they should loosen up a little bit. You know, the inflation's lower than the target, they can loosen up and so forth. The problem is the rupee. The rupee is very weak because of all these trade interventions and sanctions interventions. And so the Reserve Bank did the right thing. They held the repo rate at 5.5% to keep the rupee more or less under control. If they would have lowered the rate, I think the rupee would have been hit harder than it's been hit.
So what do you see the way forward? I mean, you talked about the BRICS coming together, taking on Trump, and basically not even taking on Trump. You're saying that it's a country which is destroying itself. You spoke about the American economy being at its worst possible, probably heading for recession. Why do you say that? Are there direct impact? Is this an impact of the Trump tariffs? Because a lot of people in the US have spoken about the tariffs backfiring on the American economy, on the American consumer. However, Trump has been very clearly saying in all of his presses I've been watching, he's very categorically said that there's been no impact of the tariffs on the American economy per se.
Well, that's because he's you have to give Trump credit. He's a master at reality TV and taking up taking all the air out of the media. I mean, any place in the world, the front page is what every day? It's not Trump. In India, you know, they don't have Modi on the front page. They got Trump on the front page.
Okay, it's 50-50. Yeah.
So there's that aspect to the thing. But the reality is, you want me to explain why I think we will have a recession, and there are two factors. One is the monetary picture. For the last 2.5, 3 years, the money supply has actually contracted in the United States. And when that happens, it's only happened 4 times since the Federal Reserve, our central bank, was founded in 1913. And every one of the contractions is followed by a recession. So the money dominates. Money's the fuel for the economy. And as I said before, the Reserve Bank in India has been fueling just about the right amount of fuel in. It's just a little below Hanke's golden growth rate. So that fuel has been just about going right. The golden growth rate for the United States, by the way, consistent with hitting our inflation target of 2%, is 6.3%. And what is the growth rate? It's 4.5. It's way below. So that means that the recession is baked in the cake because of something that has happened to the money supply way before Trump was even elected.
Right.
Okay. So that's point one. And that's a dominant thing. Point number 2 is the thing you've raised, and that is the uncertainty with regard to tariffs and the backfire regarding tariffs. That just puts more downward pressure on what would normally be a slowing economy in the United States anyway. So those are the two things. You've got the very slow money growth that's been going on for 2.5, 3 years. And the second thing is all the uncertainty that Trump is injecting into the system because of changing tariffs and changing all kinds of things, by the way. It's just not tariffs. We have what I call regime uncertainty in the United States right now. It's not normal micro little uncertainty here, uncertainty there. It's uncertainty every place. It's just a global kind of uncertainty. And the only time we've had that... Go ahead.
Sorry, just coming back to tariffs. Why hasn't Trump, he's very gung-ho on tariffs. And why hasn't he tariffed China? China is, and also the secondary penalty, the secondary sanctions, because China is the largest consumer of Russian oil.
Oh, he's learned what I have known for a long time, because, by the way, I'm a special advisor at Renmin University in Beijing, so I know a little bit about what goes on there. And let me remark that in the field of critical materials, which happens to be one of my specialties, as a former board member and special advisor to the AMG Critical Materials Group in Amsterdam, they have in China control over what I call the three M's: mining, metallurgy, and material science. China dominates. And China dominates in all these critical materials, not just the rare earths, but all the critical materials. And they therefore have an ace up their sleeve. China has an ace up their sleeve that, by the way, India doesn't have. India doesn't have this kind of, but China, if China actually cut off the critical material supply going into the world, they could shut the U.S. economy down in about 6 to 9 months, and Trump now realizes that, and that's why Trump. You notice, as you said, you ask the question, you say, well, why isn't Trump playing hardball with China? Because he can't. They have all the cards. It's a little bit like Putin. He can't play hardball with Putin because Putin has all the cards. Now,
all right, so they're probably
in the case of India, by the way, speaking of cards, they don't really have that many cards.
And possibly this situation now will, knowing Prime Minister Modi, probably will get him to that level of wanting to hold some cards in situations like this. So probably,
why do you think Modi's going to China? He's gonna pick up some cards.
right. Talking about Modi going,
you have to put people don't realize the Indian foreign minister is a very sophisticated guy. He's a very smart guy. He's very experienced. You know, he's had time in Moscow, so he knows the Russian situation, and believe me, I am certain the first one to recommend that trip from India to China was the foreign minister. Or if he wasn't the first one, he definitely put a green light on it. He gave it a thumbs up.
But China and India, and while we are partners in BRICS, we don't share a very cordial, or we have not shared a very cordial relationship, largely because of a very porous border.
You know, within the last year, you were shooting bullets at each other.
Yeah, exactly.
But things can be mended. You know, if you're attacked by somebody on the outside, and your former enemy, let's say China, is being attacked by the same person, maybe you get together and circle the wagons together rather than shooting at each other across the border. And Russia plays naturally into the thing from a military point of view, because India needs Russia very badly, because all of its military equipment came from where? It came from Russia. So to get bullets, where do you get them? You get them from Russia. To get spare parts for the military equipment that you have, where do you get them? You get it from Russia.
And it's not just the military equipment. When India has needed support on the international stage, Russia has always stood by its side.
Oh,
that's gone back decades.
Oh, this goes back way back to the non-aligned nations, the Soviet Union, and all of that. So there's a long history.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when Team Trump comes and says, okay, stop buying oil from Russia, and break all ties with them, it just doesn't sit very well with Indians, because I think Prime Minister Modi has made it very clear, this policy of multi-alignment that India has, that we will do business in national interest. What is good for India?
And this gets to another point about India. So I said, ideally, in the ideal world, all of the BRICS, all the South would have some huge free trade agreement. In my view, that would be my strategic view would be that. But this requires, by the way, India to clean its own stable, because India has a history on trade that's been a disaster. Speaking of history, the history of tariffs and trade non trade barriers, India has been very bad. They have a terrible history. So there's a lot of cleaning up at home to do.
As I was speaking to
In
an
other words,
advisor.
we started this by kind of, pointing our finger at Trump and criticizing Trump's new tariff moves. But if you look historically, India's had one of the worst trade records you can find.
Yeah, we were largely a closed nation till about two decades ago. 3 decades ago, sorry. 1991 is when we opened up the economy. So I think we were late to the party in any case.
The history of this is very simple, by the way. The Brahmins in India wrote the Constitution, and it has all kinds of socialist language in it, the Indian Constitution. And the Brahmins, who were all educated in London and were all left-wingers, by the way, all of the Brahmins were lefties. And
sorry, you will just be back. I think there is a problem. There is a problem with Mr. Hank's connectivity. We will just come back to you and we will continue this conversation. Let's hope we're able to get him. That was a very interesting conversation that we're having with Steve Hanks, Professor of Applied Economics at the Johns Hopkins University. Mr. Hanks is just trying to get us back. We're trying to get him back with us as soon as possible. But very interesting thought process there, very interesting conversation there, where he's telling India and China and Russia and Brazil, basically he's telling BRICS to come together and sort of, yes, there we have him back. Thank you. I was just recapping parts of our conversation for our viewers so that they don't leave us because we are live.
I think the main thing that we were closing on, which is one of my main points in the history of, as I used to refer to, the subcontinent. I still like the subcontinent, quite frankly. And my point is that there is, on trade and economics, there's a lot of history in India that from my point of view is bad. And it all comes from the Brahmins. The Brahmins were all educated in London in the 1930s. They were all imbued with socialism and left-wing thoughts. They were all, as we would say, lefties. And that language and those ideas are embedded in the Indian Constitution. So there's a lot of history behind where India started from after independence. And also, you said, well, yeah, they've opened up since the 1990s. That's true. But let me conclude by saying that there's still a lot of Brahmin rubbish that has to be.
There's still a long way to go.
A long way to go.
A long way to go. But let me just circle back just for a minute and just talk. I think we've already taken a lot of your time, but just a couple of more questions, sir. And this is about Pakistan. This strategic shift, and this is not a foreign policy question. This is a simple question about what this is a clear shift between in the Trump administration between how he viewed Pakistan once upon a time and how he views Pakistan today. They've signed an oil deal, and he even put out a message, taunting India that one day maybe we'll have to buy oil from Pakistan. How do you see this? Because given Pakistan's history of not just terrorism, but also the fact that it's a bankrupt state, how does this deal work vis-a-vis India, and how does this change?
That's a very interesting and important question, but it's very easy to answer. The pivot is all a military operation. The pivot away from India into Pakistan. Remember, the the Pakistani field marshal that's holding my good friend Imran Khan. The last time I talked to Imran Khan was an hour and a half conversation, Zoom. He was in Lahore. I was in Baltimore. We talked for an hour and a half about how the game plan economically to get Pakistan out of its doom loop. That was what we were talking about. Now,
Yeah.
of course, enemy number one of Khan, they've had Khan now for over 2 years in solitary confinement. Anyone less than Captain Pakistan would be dead by now. But I hope we can get him out. But let me go to the point here. The pivot is totally military. Air bases in Pakistan are about a 10-minute flight from Pakistan into Tehran. You got the picture?
Yes.
So
So
the
you feel
next time the U.S. bombs Tehran, believe me, the planes will be taking off from Pakistan.
wow. Okay, that's an angle that definitely wasn't something that I'd been thinking about, but interesting. So the pivot is primarily military and therefore to target Iran. What
Uh,
about
it's 100%. Why do you think the field marshal has been in the United States 2 times in the last month? And why do you think he had lunch with Trump? And by
right?
the way, in Pakistan, he is the most popular person in Pakistan from a political point of view is Imran Khan by a huge amount, and he's in prison. The generals have low credibility. The political elites have low credibility because they're totally corrupt. You didn't mention corruption. They're totally corrupt.
Absolutely.
I just looked at the capital flight in Pakistan recently, and the capital flight amounts to, over the last 20 years, the capital flight in Pakistan has amounted to 37% of the accumulated debt they've accumulated.
Okay, there we go again. I think uh, there are Professor Hank is having a lot of trouble with his internet connectivity today. But interesting point on Pakistan and interesting point on Trump wanting to use Pakistani military bases to target Iran the next time he does. And that is an interesting thing because obviously he's talking about there being a continuing operation against Iran. But sir, you're back. Thank you.
I was making a point about the capital flight. So what happens that the debt accumulates in Pakistan, huge amount of accumulation of debt over the last 20 years. The money comes in the front door, but 37% of it goes out the back door and goes over to Dubai. And who do you think is carrying the cash in their suitcases? It's all the political class and the military class. So that's
Interesting.
Pakistan. That's why it's important. As an economist, I always like to follow the money.
Absolutely. Follow the money and you'll know where whose whose bread is buttered which way. But just before you go, sir, on China and Trump's attitude towards China, not being able to, how do you what happens next if there are tariffs after this 90-day pause again? Because this is one thing that has been on my mind, that if there is a tariff again if China is tariffed again after this 90-day pause, what happens then? What next in Indo-China relations? And what happens to the China plus one strategy that the United States had as far as India is concerned?
It's a little hard to predict. All of these things. As I told you before, my crystal ball's kind of in the closet today. But one thing I have a pretty good idea of: China will play hardball, and China has essentially all the cards.
Okay, China will play hardball.
So China will come out on top.
All right, China will come out on top.
They'll come out on top from a practical point of view, just because they hold all the cards, and you know who wins a card game when they hold all the cards. That's one thing. But in principle too, it's very interesting, because you have a communist country that is they're basically free traders. So square that circle.
Yeah, and your advice to Trump as far as the economy is concerned, because that was a very big statement that you made about the recession. What would be your advice to Trump on tariffs going forward?
Oh, my advice would go down a black hole with regard to Trump, because Trump thinks that the trade balance that's negative and been negative since 1975 in the United States is caused by foreigners like Indians and Chinese and Japanese and things like that. He thinks these people are bad, and they're doing bad things to the United States, manipulating their currencies and all kinds of non-tariff barriers and things like that. But that's all false. That's incorrect. The trade deficit is caused by Americans. Americans spend more than the gross national product. And if they spend more than the gross national product, there has to be a negative factor that fills that gap. And the negative factor is the trade deficit. In other words, in terms of simple economics, what the students are learning there in India, it's a national income accounting identity. Americans' consumption plus investment plus government spending, that's the spending. Those three things are greater than the gross national product. And precisely by what that difference is, it's made up by definition by the trade deficit. That's the end of the story. So basically, I would have to tell the president that he didn't know what he was talking about. He doesn't even have the arithmetic right. He doesn't understand what even causes a trade deficit in the United States. Americans cause it.
Interesting. So you're not giving any advice because it's going down a black hole, but you're just saying that you don't know what you're talking about.
Well, you asked me what I would tell him, and that's what I was telling him. And by the way, as far as Trump goes, in his first term, I actually had a presidential commission with President Trump.
Interesting. So did he talk about his Nobel Peace Prize ambitions then too?
No.
All right. So those are recently acquired. All right. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us. Thank you for those inputs. And we'd love to, of course, hear from you again. We look forward to seeing you again on the Times of India. Thank you, viewers.
That would be great. I enjoyed our conversation very much.
Me too, sir. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Kindly send me a link.
Sure, will do.